Okay, boys and girls, we're going to be multiplying fractions. So a fraction multiplied by a fraction. Let's see some modeling of it and see if that makes it as simple as multiplying a whole number with a fraction. My suggestion is to go get a notepad out of the notepads, and it can have anything. We just need the back of them so that we don't need a whole sheet of paper. So let's look here. Jane is making a reusable garbage bag and lunch bag. She needs 3/4 yards of cloth to make the grocery bag. To make the lunch bag, she needs 2/3 of the amount of cloth needed to make the grocery bag. All right, so they're trying to be a little complicated here, but we know how much it takes to make the grocery bag, 3/4. But we know that it only takes 2/3 of this 3/4 to make that lunch bag. And we need to know how much cloth is that. Well, whenever I hear of, that's time. So 2/3 of 3/4. So the first thing we have to do is we have to get our material and we have to fold it vertically into 4 equal parts. So quickly fold yours into 4 equal parts. Okay, here's my 4 equal parts, and I'm just going to break these parts up for you so you can see them. You don't have to do that. Now, they said shade 2/3 or 3/4 of them yellow. So this is how much material I use to make the grocery bag. So then I don't need all that. I only need 2/3 of this. So that means I've got to break this material up into thirds. And just do the best you can to get it into thirds. So here's my thirds. And I'm going to take my marker again and show you those third parts. And they said shade in 2/3 of those parts, of the parts that I already have shaded, because I only need 2/3 of this material here. So here's 2/3 of it. Now, this is how much I used. How much is that? Well, let's look. First of all, how many parts did I cut my whole material into? Well, don't be fooled and think it's just they're talking about this. They're talking about how many equal parts did I cut all of it into. Well, I look at my array quick and I have 3 by 4. It's 12 equal parts. So here is 12. So what does each one of these come? 1/12. 1/12. 1/12. Well, how many did I need? Well, if I look at this, I needed 6/12. So 2/3 of 3/4 equals 6/12. Well, if I simplify 6/12, because they're even numbers, but I also know that 6 is a factor of 12. So if I divide them both by 6, I can get 1/2. What does that look like here? Well, that means I would have took this, and I would have moved them down here. If I would have folded my material, it would have been half of it. That makes sense. All right, explain why you should shade 2/3 of this rather than the whole thing. Well, because I only needed 2/3 of what the garbage bag took, not of the whole material. All right, let's move on. Here's 2 ways of showing it. So far, do you think multiplying double fractions is any different than multiplying a whole number? A little bit, but not much. So here's 2 ways of looking at this problem. So Margaret looks at it like this. She says, well, I know that I'm going to shade 3/4 of this, which means how many pieces did she shade? She shaded 3 of them. Okay, to find 1/3, well, that means I have this already broken into thirds. I only need 1 of them. So how many parts did she need? Well, she needed 1 out of how many parts all together did she break it into? 4s. So she says, 1/3 times 3/4 equals 1/4. But when I multiply straight across, that's not what I get. Well, let's look at the way that James does it. So here's the way she did it. Let's look at the way James did it. James had his, again, 3/4, and he shades 3/4 of it because that's all he used, but he had that many equal parts. 4 tells us how many equal parts we had to have it. All right. Now we needed 1/3 of each part. So that means I got to cut each one of these into thirds. And I only used 1 of each one of these parts. So that got me 3 parts out of how many parts did I have here? I had 12 equal parts. So his answer is 3/12. But I need to simplify. And if I divide these both by 3, because 3 is a factor of 12, I have 1/4. So what was the difference between the two ways of doing it? This one, I didn't have to simplify. This one, I did. All right. Here we go. Let's look at how they did this one. Same concept of what we did before. We had 3/5. So here they cut it into 5 equal parts, guys. They shaded 3 of those parts, so that means they shaded all these across. Then they had to cut it into thirds, so they went this way, and they needed how many of those parts shaded? 1. So how many parts were shaded? 1, 2, 3. Out of how many parts all together were they cut into? 15. Here, we broke it into 3/5. So we had 5 parts. The denominator told me how many parts. The numerator told me how many I was supposed to shade. And here, I already have it broke into thirds now, and I need 2 of those. So what do I get? 2 out of 2/3. Well, how did that happen? Well, when I take this and I multiply it, I get 6/15. If I simplify that, I know they're both a factor of 3, because 3 times 2 is 6, and 3 times 5. So I get 2/5. Oh, I made that mistake. I told you guys not to make a mistake of how many parts did I have altogether? 5. And how many did I need? 2 of them. So I made the mistake I told you not to do. Sorry. All right, let's move on. So guys, you're going to have to represent, even though you're saying, oh, well, I just have to multiply straight across. You're right. That's all you really have to do. But you have to be able to recognize the models. So I don't care how you draw the model, or if you do a piece of paper and you attach it to here. I don't care what you do, but I want models for these two. Then you can do these straight across if you're starting to make sense of the model. So you have to draw me a model for 3 and 4, and then you have to do 5 and 6 just by multiplying straight across. Always simplify. Skip that page, please, for right now. And on this page, I would like you to do the whole page. You do not have to draw a model. You just have to finish this one, unless you need the model to help you see it. Do this whole page, and on the back, I'd like you to do 1 or 2 and all of the rest.